The year was, I think, somewhere around 2002, maybe 2003. And I had just recently joined a team who had been tasked with designing and building a ground station for the next generation weather satellite prediction system. That was a big task. I mean, not only were we responsible for a very large IT infrastructure, we were responsible for doing things that no one had ever done before. Figuring out how to launch a satellite and then connect that satellite to a ground station for the purposes of transferring weather data, really all around the planet. That job put a real face on building complex systems. Being responsible for a single exchange server is one thing, but trying to build, manage, and run dozens, hundreds of servers, each aligned with the other to perform an independent task involved with getting data from that satellite down to the rest of the world. This was a big job, and it was a big job involving a lot of people and a lot of parts. It was sometime in those days where we were approached by a small upstart company called VMware. This company appreciated the significant task we had at hand and brought to us a new tool that we hadn't really heard of before. We'd heard rumors of this thing called virtualization, and we played with it a bit. The mainframe people had been telling us that virtualization and cloud computing had been around since the 60s. This tool was called VMware ESX Server, and it promised to revolutionize everything about bringing many systems online, repeatedly rebuilding systems, dealing with all the necessary connections required to keep those systems in check. In retrospect, we probably should have let that person finish their presentation because, well, we didn't end up using ESX Server. And although we didn't, I think we found much later that had we, our project might have gone quite a bit differently. It was that introduction to ESX back in that 2002-2003 timeframe that was my entree into virtualization. And although we didn't use it necessarily in production for certain aspects of our program, we did manage to find a place for it in others. ESX has been around for a long time. And in that, 10 years or more since that period of time, we've seen that small upstart company VMware get bought by EMC, release product after product, and now today is recognized as one of the leaders in virtualization products, as well as those that extend virtualization into the cloud. Today, with a vSphere infrastructure in place, there's not much you really can't do as it relates to your data center and your IT operations. Perhaps the hardest part is just simply figuring out how to implement it, how to manage it, and how best to design your vSphere infrastructure so that you can accomplish those miraculous things. My name is Greg Shields, and I've had an opportunity to work with CBT Nuggets for a really long period of time now, I think going on 9 years or more. And in this, my 20-somethingth series for CBT Nuggets, we're going to spend a lot of time taking a look at VMware's flagship vSphere operating system. We'll explore the best practices you need to know to implement it correctly. And we'll talk a lot about some of the design decisions that you'll make before you ever end up putting DVDs into drives. We'll explore the automations that vSphere offers and really take a look at how virtual machines can be made very highly available via the application of all kinds of different technologies and feature sets that are now part of this mature vSphere operating system. Like I said, I've had a lot of time to play with vSphere between then and now, and this really is honestly one of the great solutions, one of the great game-changing solutions that we in this generation of the IT industry have had the opportunity to bring to bear to solve a lot of the data center issues that we've had in our time. You know, in starting my career, we were at that phase where many of our data centers were at 103, 105% capacity. The never-ending process of purchasing new servers was really beginning to get expensive. And having to augment data centers and expand them and create new ones to support a new server for each new thing was just becoming unwieldy and extremely costly. Technologies like vSphere and virtualization itself have really, again, changed the ballgame as it relates to data center. But implementing them correctly is a task that you need to know if you're going to actually save money in the transition. Here in this series, we're going to spend some time developing skills in installing, configuring, and administering a VMware vSphere environment. We'll spend some time preparing for the VCP 550 and or the VCAD 510 exam. I'll talk more in just a second about the differences between these two exams. And all along the way, I hope to spend some time sharing with you some of my own personal experiences and some of the best practices I've learned over the last decade in implementing vSphere in environments from very small to very large. Now, if you're experienced with the CBT Nuggets way of learning technologies, you're probably familiar with the idea that we create series here. These series are each instructor's mechanism to knowledge transfer some kind of technology from what we know to hopefully what you know. That's exactly what you can anticipate seeing here. But this series is going to be a little different, because while this series will be based fundamentally on the version 5.5 release of vSphere, this series has also been crafted very specifically to make it easy for you to transition what you know in version 5.5 to the next version, and perhaps even the next version after that. VMware will be releasing new versions of vSphere on an every year or so basis. And so it's important to stay up to date with the new features and new functionalities that you see with these updated versions. And it is my hope that in crafting this series very carefully, everything you learn here will directly translate with a little help from all the things that are fun and new. In this introductory nugget, we're going to spend some time looking at VMware certification itself. Now, you may be here because you're interested in vSphere and learning about it as a technology. But it's likely you're probably also here because you at least have a passing curiosity in vSphere and VMware certification. Being certified in VMware is great for your future job potential. You're seeing VMware in data centers everywhere. And so taking what we need to know in order to be successful with virtualization and also applying a little certification-oriented spin on it is the goal of this series. I'm not here to teach you the answers to the test questions. I'm here to help you become a better IT professional and a better virtual administrator. And if you happen to, well, align the things you learn with some of the test objectives, that's just an extra bonus. We're going to spend some time talking about the intended audience, or whether or not you are prepared, or indeed the person that the VCA and the VCP are intended to test against. I've got a couple of exam notes that I think you should be aware of. I will explore with you the series outline that I've put together. 25 individual nuggets, plus a couple more bonus nuggets at the end that will help you with all the technologies that we see here in this version. The intent also is to expand on that knowledge when the next version is released. So keep coming back from time to time, particularly as you see new versions of vSphere, because here at CBT Nuggets, it's in our best interest to keep you up to date on all the new technologies. We'll take a look at the exam objectives and then a couple of the learning materials that you should at least be prepared for. And I will help you with the beginning parts of creating your own network if you plan on following along at home. We learn by doing. And so in every case, everything that I'm going to be showing you here is something that you can actually accomplish with the tools that you have available to you. If you have a powerful enough desktop with the ability to create some virtual machines, well, then I think you'll be able to follow along and see most of the really interesting technologies that we'll be talking about throughout the next 25 or 28 nuggets, or however many nuggets we have once this series is complete. I want to talk for a minute about VMware's certification and just the variety of, well, you can see all the different acronyms that I've listed here. I've split these up here into those related to vSphere version 5, those for vSphere version 4, and then those for the vCloud certification. The knowledge you'll be learning in this series is most specifically related to those we see here in vSphere 5, the VCA DCV and the VCP5 DCV. These are the VMware Certified Associate and the VMware Certified Professional in Data Center Virtualization. I introduced these first because they're kind of the first and second tests that you would, or certifications that you would get if you intend on going through the entire certification path here with VMware. The VCA is an introductory sort of certification designed if you're familiar with VMware technologies, and proves that you're aware of the technologies, how they interrelate, and some of the basic introductory concepts surrounding enterprise virtualization. The VCP5 goes much more in depth with the actual technologies that you need to implement, and very specifically talks to the implementation of data center virtualization. Once you take the VCA and or VCP5, then the next step is either the VCAP, the advanced test, the vCenter Advanced Professional, in either data center administration or data center design. Now, these are very different exams for two very different types of people. The data center administration exam is perhaps the most direct second step from the VCP5 DCV. So if you think of yourself as more of a hands-on, actually going and doing configurations type of administrator, well, perhaps the DCA is your next best bet. If, however, design activities and boxes on paper and making sure that everything interconnects from a high level perspective and keeping all the teams appropriately interconnected and integrated is your cup of tea, well, the VCAP 5 DCD, the design exam, is one that you probably want to take a look at. The capstone exam here, or certification here, is the VCDX 5 DCV. VCDX stands for the VMware Certified Design Expert in Data Center Virtualization. This is the VMware equivalent to Cisco's CCIE exam. There aren't many people that are VCDX certified, and this is a tough exam that requires deep knowledge and strong experience in VMware technologies and components. The VCDX can even include a practicum where you actually show that you know what you're talking about. And so the VCDX is not for the faint of heart. But it does provide that top level certification if you want to prove yourself as being one of the most skilled and experienced individuals as it relates to VMware technologies. You can see here with the VCP4, if you're running on vSphere version 4, these certifications map fairly closely to what you see here in vSphere 5. And so I put these here mainly to show that there has been a forward progression of certifications from version to version. VMware these days is focusing their attentions not only on data center virtualization, but also on cloud technologies. And so a new series of certifications, the VCA and VCP Cloud Certs, that focus on VMware's vCloud technologies and platforms are also available. With that, you can go from the VCA to the VCP, then to either of the VCAPs, the VMware Certified Advanced Professional in Data Center in Cloud Infrastructure Design or Cloud Infrastructure Administration, and then cap things off with the VCDX Cloud. VMware's vCloud certifications are by no means intended to be the next step past the vSphere certifications. They just test a different set of technologies. And so you may find yourself moving in one direction or also moving in another. Now, having looked at these certifications and all the kind of crazy acronyms that I've got listed here, you might be thinking, am I the right person to actually take this exam? Am I the intended audience for either the VCP or the VCA? Well, candidates for the VCP exam, the more technology-oriented exam, have approximately 6 months of experience working with the vSphere implementation. These are your typical infrastructure personnel. They're people that install and configure ESXi hosts. They're used to using vCenter Server to monitor, manage, troubleshoot, and administer virtual machines. So if this describes you, you might be the right person to consider taking that VCP. Also, a VCP is someone who most likely will have additional industry-related general IT certifications or an equivalent 2 to 5 year experience. So if you've got some Microsoft certs or even some Cisco certs or other ones that are out there that relate to data center administration, these are a great starting point for helping you know the technologies or proving that you know the technologies that get you started with virtualization. Now, the VCA, as I said, is not directly think of it more of as an introductory exam or a certification that's designed for people that aren't exactly clicking the buttons, but that are working with those that are. Candidates for VCA are familiar with VMware products and technologies, and very specifically the business needs that can be met by those technologies. You may have a number of different job roles that interact with data center virtualization technologies. So you may be managing those people. You may be helping sell products. You may be designing products. You may be just involved with the process in some way. Successful candidates will have worked with VMware vSphere, should be knowledgeable of the other VMware solutions where vSphere serves as a foundation. You'll find that your data center will become ever more reliant on vSphere as you end up incorporating these technologies with other technologies layering on top. And a VCA candidate should have related industry recognized general IT certs or equivalent experience of 1 to 2 years. So the VCA, great starting point. Also great if you don't intend on getting as deep as the individuals that would take the VCP intend on getting with their technologies. Now again, while this series is not directly about exam preparation, we are going to spend some time talking about how these different things you need to know interrelate with the types of objectives that the exams test against. So being aware of just some of the exam notes or some of the thoughts associated with those exams can be handy as well. If you plan on taking the VCA, I'll start with the second bullet here. The VCA is 50 questions, it's 75 minutes. You have a couple of more minutes there if you're a non-English speaker. Whereas the VCP5 has 135 questions and 120 minutes. That's like 52 seconds per question. So you'll find that these questions are going to be relatively, you can presume that these questions will be relatively simplistic because you're going to have to read and respond to the question within about 52 seconds or so based off of these metrics here. VMware kind of cheats almost with their passing scores because the passing score for either exam is considered to be 300 on a 100 to 500 scale and using a scaled scoring method. Doing so has a couple of different purposes. One of which is that by using a scaled scoring method, they can give you just less information about exactly how much you need to prepare for these exams. This may be uniquely different than some of the other exams where you know by percentage exactly how much effort you might spend with each topic. VMware's not giving away anything here. And so these scaled scores will be calculated using a mathematical formula that considers a variety of factors, including the number and type of exam questions and the specific version of the exam you get. Because of this, the exam actually may differ. You will probably be getting a different version of the exam than somebody else. And because of that, the scaling provides what they call a fair score for the individual. In English, what this means is that the questions have a weighting. And the questions that you receive, if you receive easier questions, that weighting will be different based on someone who receives what are considered to be more difficult questions. The exam is administered through Pearson VUE, and you can go to this URL here, vue.com/VMware, to actually register for the exam. And there is one very special note here that you really can't ignore if you're considering taking this certification. VMware, for whatever reason you might assume, requires that in order for you to achieve the VCP5 DCV certification, you have to sit for one of their formal classes. These 5 are the options that are available in this version. Install, configure, manage the fast track to optimize and scale, the troubleshooting workshop, or the vSphere with vCops fast track. Call it what you will, whether it's important for the sanctity of the exam or just a play for extra dollars. VMware has always required that you sit for these classes. Even if you take and pass the exam, you will not be certified unless you can show that you have sat for one of these classes. So be prepared for that. It is for that reason why, again, that we spend more time here in this series focusing on the technologies and the application of them and the best practices and all the things you need to know rather than a direct exam prep, because many of those things you'll find in the classes themselves. So use this as a regular refresher for those things that you might learn in the classes, or use it as a way to augment what you might learn should you choose some of the alternative classes like the Optimize and Scale or the Troubleshooting Workshop. This special note can come to really aggravate you, especially when you consider some of the costs for the classes. So don't assume that you can take the test and automatically be certified. There are going to be some costs involved if you want to get that VCP. You should recognize also that the VCA requires no such classes, only the VCP. Here in this series, I've borrowed from many of the objective domains that VMware releases publicly as part of their exam preparation guide. In many cases, I've reordered items or moved objectives from one domain to the other to create an entire series that's designed to introduce each technology as you would probably begin considering it during the regular implementation of a vSphere environment. We start with vCenter Server. We go through ESXi installations. We go through some of the network topics here and the storage topics and the security topics before we ever get to creating and deploying virtual machines or vApps. It's only then that we start talking about the management of virtual machines and the administration of them, clones and templates, and then we move on to VMware clusters. The clustering topic is set so late in this series only because there are so many additional things you have to lay into place before you ever get to the notion of creating a VMware cluster. It's here with that we can talk about the vMotion topic, migrating virtual machines and all the awesomeness that you get with vMotions and storage vMotions. We talk a bit about some of the basic troubleshooting items for vCluster or for clusters in vMotion as well. Then we move on to resources, and then an extended view at all of the different high availability options that exist here in vSphere version 5.5. We continue through the variety of options from the least invasive and least expensive from a resource and cost perspective, all the way through the most invasive and most costly. So these are things like resource pools, fault tolerance, backing up virtual machines, migrating virtual machines, and all the different topics in between. You'll learn about HA and DRS. You'll learn about FT. You'll learn about vSphere backups and all the things that are required to make sure that your data center is always operational. We'll then move into a couple of topics on just maintenance, patching and updating, and performing upgrades of your servers, your hypervisor infrastructure, and your vServer infrastructure, and conclude with a look at some of the monitoring and performance and capacity management tools that exist here in the interface. There are a lot of ways that you can manage performance in vSphere. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard. The ones that are easy are usually a little bit more expensive than the ones that are hard. But we'll talk about all of them here in this series. I do want to spend a minute and not necessarily review the exam objectives, because those objectives and these individual nugget titles are pretty much aligned. But what I want to do is take a minute to just point you in the direction of perhaps the most important document you can take a look at in not only studying for the exam, but also in preparing yourself for the types of things you can anticipate seeing here in this series. VMware releases to the public what is called their blueprint, or their exam blueprint. And in this case, this exam blueprint is a 25-page document for the VCP5 DCP exam, specifically the code VCP 550. This document was released not that long ago, well, depending on when you're watching this series, but it's a relatively new version of it here, released in January of 2014. I tell you that this is an excellent document for you to review, and perhaps arguably one of the best ones to start with, because it is this blueprint where you will find all the content that relates to the individual exam objectives and the knowledge that you need to be prepared for to meet each objective. For each of those pieces, there is also references to the VMware documentation and other locations where you can find further information and the graphic, gory details about everything that we're talking about in this series and that you need to prepare for that exam. I also point this out because this series is by no means intended to be comprehensive for all the different things and possible questions you can get asked on this exam. By no means do I want to say that you can watch all the videos of this series and immediately be prepared to take and pass that exam. No, that's not the job of this. Here, our job is to help you understand the technologies, to get familiar with them, and to have the opportunity to see these technologies being laid into place without you having to go through the effort yourself in implementing them. Sometimes building the demos for these series takes a really long period of time before the camera ever gets turned on. And so being able to very quickly understand what we're talking about and see it in action is the reason why we've created these series. Now that said, being able to accomplish this on your own is an important part of the learning process. And so everything, as I said, that we're going to be accomplishing here is something that you can, with the right hardware and software licenses, be able to do on your own at home. We will be using a technique called nested virtualization to create this entire environment. Your workstation, your desktop, if you intend on following along at home, should be installed with a copy of VMware Workstation, whatever the latest version is. Inside that copy of VMware Workstation, you'll find that we'll be creating a variety of virtual machines, potentially a domain controller if there's not one already on your network, a vCenter server, and at least for me, I'll be creating 3 different ESXi hosts, 1, 2, and 3. These hypervisor hosts provide the basis for everything that we'll be accomplishing inside the interface. They'll work with the vCenter server here, and the vCenter server will handle the management tasks for telling them to accomplish things. Then inside these hosts, a second level deeper, will be the virtual machines and virtual appliances that we'll create and install. We'll be working with a pair of virtual machines that are Windows Server 2012, although you'll find we won't be spending much time in the Windows Server 2012 interface, much at all. We will also, at various points during the series, be working with a series of appliances that are delivered by VMware itself. These are things like the vCenter Server appliance, VMware Data Protection, VMware Replication, and vCenter Operations, or what is lovingly termed vCops. These you'll be able to download from VMware's website generally. There tends to be an evaluation program where you can get enough licenses to be able to run these things for a short period of time just to see how they work. One important recommendation here when you create the one or more desktops that you'll use to host VMware Workstation, consider implementing SSD disks as the disks where all of these things are stored onto. Anytime you're involved with nested virtualization or virtual machines inside of virtual machines, the deeper level virtual machines, kind of like that movie Inception, the deeper level virtual machines tend to perform poorly if they don't have a large amount of resources that are very fast. And SSD disks on those desktops tends to provide some of the best performance boosts of really any kind of hardware that you can apply to your workstation environment. Now, the environment I'm using here it has two of these desktops that I've implemented. Each desktop has a terabyte or excuse me, half a terabyte SSD and 32 gigs of RAM. This RAM is necessary because of all the simultaneously running virtual machines that we'll have. I don't think I used the whole 64 gigs throughout the period, but I'm definitely using at least about 32 gigs, at least as we get towards the later periods of this series. So get yourself some good hardware, because following along with the good hardware will definitely mean you're not pulling your hair out as things start to slow down with more virtual machines operating simultaneously. So with that, looking forward to spending the next 20 something nuggets or however many nuggets together with you, learning about vSphere, sharing some of our experiences, laughing a little, loving a little, spending the time to come to understand everything we need to know to be a successful virtual administrator in a vSphere world. Most importantly, we're going to have a lot of fun. My name is Greg Shields, and I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.